I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Barb, are you going to inspire us today?
Yeah, I hope so. This is something that I just came across on the internet, and it's called 6 Little Stories with Lots of Meanings. Once all villagers decided to pray for, on the day of prayer, all the people gathered, but only one boy came with an umbrella. That's faith. Babies in the air, they laugh because they know you will catch them. That is trust. Every night we go to bed without any assurance of being alive in the next morning, but still we set the alarm to wake up. That is hope. We plan big things for tomorrow in spite of zero knowledge of the future. That is confidence. We see the world suffering, but still we get married and have children. That is love. On an old man's shirt was written a sentence, I'm not 80 years old. I am sweet 16 with 64 years of experience. That is attitude. Have a happy day and live your life like these 6 stories. Remember, good friends are the rare jewels of life, difficult to find and impossible to replace.
Thank you, Barb. Bill, did you have something?
Oh, absolutely. I've got some history. This was in the morning call, and it was called the Civic Club Meetings, March 21st, 1940. Remember the date? 1940. The chaotic conditions of the present day may be an indication that the educational methods of the past 20 years need changing to meet changing economic and social orders, said Dr. Joseph F. Noonan, president of East Stroudsburg State Teachers College, speaking at the Easton Kiwanis Club meeting at the Hotel Easton Wednesday. Dr. Noonan said that in the past, writing, reading, spelling, and arithmetic were thought to be all that was necessary in education. Now, he said, education is not defined as the collection of education, but as a means of teaching ways of thinking. The speaker was introduced by W. Stanley Lanterman. The Kiwanis Career Conference at Easton High School this morning was announced by Herbert Henderson. They will begin at 8:35. Orion H. Reeves, who was mayor of Easton, announced that James McClintock, vice chairman of the American National Red Cross, will speak at the annual meeting of the Easton chapter of the Red Cross with the Easton Kiwanis Club the following week. The club was urged by Alfred Lane to get behind a projected campaign to secure a new road between Easton, Bethlehem, and Allentown. Bernie Goodman presided. 1940, a new road was talked about between Easton, Bethlehem, and Allentown. Could that have been 22?
Thank you, Bill. I see we have a couple guests this morning. I believe we have Nancy Amaker from Vaccinosa. Gary?
Oh, Marianne West. Well, Marianne's joined us before.
Okay.
I don't know. She's a guest, but
Okay. All right.
you know.
Welcome. I got one thing. I got a special member to recognize today. We know that our club helps kids in our community, but children in all parts of the world can benefit from the Kiwanis support. And through the Kiwanis Children's Fund, members can reach kids beyond our city limits. I'm proud to say that one of our members has helped Kiwanis reach kids around the world. I'd like to give special thanks to Walt. Your gift helped feed nutritious food to hungry kids and empower teens to become the leaders of tomorrow. Your gift could spark the joy of reading in a child who now has his own collection of books, or make sure a teen has access to a computer and the internet. On behalf of the Children's Fund, I'd like to thank you for your generosity and for helping kids near and far. Thank you, Walt. We have quite a bit to do today, so Terry, would you like to introduce our speaker?
Well, but as you know,
I know. Okay.
in the past,
I have
this
to
is
ask you
Tracy
that.
Piazza, and Tracy's coming to us from the Easton School District. And I will let her, I'm sure she'll give some background on herself. She told me that there's some things that she'll talk about. So if we're going to get started, this is Tracy Piazza. Welcome.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. I am Tracy Piazza. It's nice to see some friendly faces Nick and I go back probably to when I was a teenager. Many years ago, and Walt and I certainly have had interactions at Cheston School, so many years of service that he has given to our Easton School District, so thank you for that as well. And some other, certainly some familiar faces here and on the screen. This is my 33rd year in Easton, my entire career in Easton in education. And I am currently the assistant superintendent for curriculum instruction. So I've kind of gone the gamut from teacher and every role in between. And it's certainly an honor to be here today and just share a little bit about our district and kind of where we've been. When I talked to Terry, you know, she was specifically interested in how COVID impacted our district. And then also, you know, how are we coming out on the other side and what's new within our district. So I'm going to just share some highlights with you, and then, you know, certainly happy to talk about anything that maybe I didn't mention that you're interested in. So next slide. Okay, we can go to the next one as well. All right. If we look back at kind of a little bit of a look back for a couple of years, right prior to COVID, our district was under different leadership. We had a different superintendent and quite frankly, an entirely different upper leadership team. Irrelevant, because they were great individuals whom I loved working with and were focused on kids and did some great things. Unfortunately, towards as we're leading into 2019, there were some incidents that happened within the district that became public knowledge and kind of tarnished the perception. And a lot of that was around the perception of race, our wrestling program, athletics. And so there were items that just kind of started to take us in a place that wasn't necessarily publicly or perceptually the place we wanted to be as a district. At that very same time, our school board asked for a survey of the community, of our staff, to kind of ascertain what is the climate within the district, both from the inside perspective and from a perceptual community perspective. And again, around that same time, our superintendent, who was John Reinhardt, again, beloved, great educator for 45 years, I believe, between Bangor and many other districts, decided it was time for him to retire, and that would have been his third attempt at retiring, actually. And so we were certainly sad to see him go, and with that brought on the superintendent search. In the interim, they brought in a person to run the district for about 3 months as the interim superintendent and kind of continue the pathway and try to clean up some pieces that were amiss in the public perception. And finally, we have David Pipperado, who is our current superintendent, who emerged as the successful candidate. So from a kind of a historical perspective of top leadership, that's where we started. And I mentioned that because as we look at COVID, Dave Pipperado started in November of 19. And spent his first 2 or 3 months really going out, talking to the teachers, talking to the community. So he spent very little time in his office. In fact, our interim superintendent stayed on to do some of the managerial pieces for the day-to-day. So Dave can go out and become familiar with the community he chose to serve. And then March hit, and we went into COVID. So a heck of a start for a new superintendent in the district, who then served for the last 2 years up until this year under the guise of COVID. And so, the challenges that he faced, and then the way we had to rethink about education, because on March 20th, as you know, schools closed, as did many businesses, and probably your club meetings as you knew them. You can go to the next slide. So, teaching in COVID, that began abruptly. We actually thought we'd have a little bit of time. We left, I believe it was on March 13th, and thought we'd be back and be able to gather our things or maybe be out for a week or so and, regroup. And we obviously didn't come back in a full capacity, a normal capacity, until this year. So that entire March to June, our students were out of the building, as were our staff. And at that time, we at least had enough forethought to have our kids who had technology available to them from the school, which were iPads, to take them home. Or we brought them back and kind of did a handoff through car windows to make sure they had some technology. But that was our 3rd through 12th grade students. our 3rd through 12th grade students who had little familiarity with using it as a asynchronous tool, meaning that they had the tools to go in and learn on their own without connecting to a teacher. And our K-2 kids had no issued devices from the school district. So those first couple of months, March to June, our teachers really needed to learn Zoom, as you all did, or learn Google Meets, which is another connectivity platform, and then learn how to navigate teaching their kids over this screen, some who were interested, some who weren't, some who had chaos in their home, because of every child being home at the same time. And then our K-2s, we were literally printing packets and making them available at all the schools for our parents to come out, pick them up if they so chose, drop them back off the next week, disseminate them out to teachers to grade them, and try to get some feedback out there. So from March to June, I will say, education was tenuous, tenuous at best. And we were hopeful that we would come back in the fall, and of course that did not happen. So as we got to, God bless you, as we got to August of 20, we found ourselves in a situation that kids were not coming back, God bless you, to the building again. And we had, per the state and everything else, we had to put protocols in place on how can we safely educate kids, whether that be at home or whether that be in school, and how can we try to get kids back to school as soon as possible. So putting those mitigation pieces in place, which included masking and cleaning routines and probably all the things that you talked about, as a club, we were able to get our kids back and give our parents some options. And those were either in hybrid, which really meant that kids came to school 2 days a week. All kids were off on Wednesdays in terms of working from home, not in a building, so that the building can be re-cleaned for the next group of kids who are coming for 2 days a week on Thursday and Friday. So that was one option for kids. The second option was to stay home remotely all 5 days and learn through Zoom and Google Classroom, which is a platform that you can put work into, respond back, and get it graded within there. So we had kids who chose that option, and it was taught by our teachers. So about half of our teachers were teaching remote sector of kids. And then the third option was cyber, which sounds very similar to remote, the difference being it was run through a platform. So kids got on the platform, instead of being engaged with an Easton teacher, they were engaged with some videos that were through a purchase platform. So it was a video of a teacher teaching whatever the content area was, and you were doing the work online. And through that process, our teachers, were tired and certainly stressed, but stood tall and worked hard. And I cannot say enough about our teachers, our students, our parents who have now become teachers in their home, trying to work, trying to manage a family, all happening under the roof and no break 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so, we certainly have to recognize, our families. And, Terry, from the daycare world, that was a huge challenge for our child care centers. One, a lot of them were shut down and trying to figure out how to stay afloat, how to service kids, how to, be a value to the community. And once they got open, through this learning through online, they had kids from 7 or 8 different schools, all who had different teachers with different schedules and trying to manage learning within their facilities. So you can imagine the undertaking that was for them. So certainly when I speak about the trials and tribulations and successes on the other side, it's not just the school district. It was and is the community at large that went through an ordeal to come back out on the other side. And you can switch slides for there. And what I will say now at present, we did come back this year. We still gave our kids the 2 options. One was to come back in person, and that's 5 days a week, or to join our cyber education platform, which is still a platform that is largely taught by an online set of videos that they watch and respond to, but we connected it to an Easton teacher as well. So they always connect in on at least a weekly basis, if not a daily basis, with an Easton teacher. They check their work, they see if they need some remedial support or some extension support. and kind of get their education that way. Right now, our numbers in cyber are around 600. They fluctuate between 500 and 600, which is about where they were during COVID. I will say that first September, when we offered that option, it was around 900 kids, and it just kept dwindling as people realized that may not be the most effective way for their students to learn. And currently it's around 600. I do expect, as people become more comfortable and what happens with variants, with COVID, that people will come back to brick and mortar, but it will level out, that the folks that liked learning in the cyber manner will continue to do that. And so we are going to continue to offer a cyber program in Easton, and we have assigned an individual to lead that charge. But what we noticed with our kids coming back are a few things. One noted by Mr. Pipperado, September being the first time that he had any semblance of normalcy in terms of what you might know as a school system here in Easton. So we did bring our kids back. And that, was an awesome experience to see kids in the hallway. It brought life back to our buildings, but it also comes with some challenges. We still had kids who had to be masked. We still had teachers who had to be masked and trying to teach, particularly little ones with your faces covered, and for them being able to read, all the information that they should off of a face. There are absolutely learning gaps. You hear about, are there learning gaps from COVID? And regardless how well our teachers taught and how attuned to what kids were, it's just not the same as that hands-on learning experience. And so we obviously had to get right to work and try to recognize individual by individual, where were those learning gaps, and then across systems, are there commonalities, and how do we fill those gaps for kids? One of the things we noticed is student behavior came back very differently in terms of being accustomed to working as a school community and a classroom unit. So that was a piece for our teachers really to think about, how do I re-enculturate students into that learning environment, into a school community? And then the behaviors from a social emotional piece, we absolutely saw, the COVID shutdown, the pandemic take a toll on kids' mental health in terms of not being able to socialize with their peers, not having all that interaction that they were used to. And then whatever they may have dealt with in their own family unit that maybe they had relief from or support from, or just an outlet in sports, or whatever that may have been for students. So a social emotional piece of it is a really real element. And you talk about that, and through media heard about kids who wanted to commit suicide, or who were just feeling despair. And I will say it absolutely is real. And I think we're coming out the other side of that now as we normalize a little bit, but we've had to really come to terms with that and recognize that our kids and our teachers, our staff's mental health is first priority before we can even get back to the true business of education. And so, lots of time spent on that. And I don't remember if it's this slide or somewhere else, but I talk about trauma informed. And that's a buzzword, but it really means, how do we look at kids? How do we look at human beings from a lens of empathy and sympathy, and recognize that all of these experiences, whether they're tragic as a loss in your life, or whether it's COVID and your life changed, that causes trauma, and it manifests itself differently for every individual. And so for a teacher, a staff member who has now 25 kids in their classroom, they have to kind of learn to lead through some grace and kind of understand that those behaviors that they're seeing that are atypical are not because the child wants to come and wreak havoc on your classroom. It's really a cry for, it's a cry for help, or just a lack of knowledge of how to even express what they're feeling, and getting back into the normal business of education. And so, that certainly is real and true of our COVID experience for our kids. For our teachers, again, I can never thank them or say enough about them. They're a dedicated group of individuals who got lots of credit during the first year of COVID, and that quickly wanes, when you come back to reality and people realize that They need to get on with their life too. That level of support and appreciation starts to wane, and you kind of forget all of those things that teachers do on a daily basis. But they are steadfast, hardworking, and as though it wasn't hard enough, we required them to still do double duty when kids were sent home because of COVID and they had to quarantine. We required our teachers to log on in that Zoom manner and now teach the kids that are in front of them and try to connect with kids that were home as well. And it's an exhausting task. Some probably say not even educationally sound, but we made that decision because we thought that we owed it to our kids. We are telling them they can't come to school for a very specific reason. And sometimes if you're just quarantined, you're feeling completely healthy. And we just felt that they were owed an education as well, even if it wasn't the best that we had to offer. It was at least some connectivity to their class and lessons to be learned. And that has taken a toll on our teachers, and we recognize that. And the other hard piece of COVID is certainly, COVID in and of itself is very polarized, politically charged, and while everybody is certainly allowed and should respect your own opinions around tough situations, coming back to one organization, that makes it a challenge because you can never please everyone because everyone has a different perspective. And so we certainly had a camp of parents who felt that it was not the business of the schools to require kids to wear masks. And then we have another camp that feels like kids should still be wearing masks today. And so you can never please everyone. And so, Mr. Pipperado and the team and everyone that had a lot to think about in terms of what do we need, where do we need to settle in aside from our own political beliefs to keep this community as safe as we can. And what we noticed was following the mitigation plans kept our kids as safe as we could because there was very little spread, or at least that was noted and documented, that happened within the school. And so schools were one of the safer places because kids were kept in little silos, because kids were wearing masks, because we were ultra sensitive to washing hands and cleaning and all those protocols. But there are lots of opinions whether those were the right decisions or not. And I think it was maybe about a month ago that we were able to lighten up and make masks optional. And I will say most of our staff took their masks off. Most of our elementary age kids took their masks off, though not all. And surprisingly, most of our high school kids kept them on. And I will say this is the first week that we are starting to see our high school kids choose to not wear them. And that is really opposite of what we thought would happen. We thought they would be the first ones to rip them off. That is not what happened at all. And so, interesting dynamics around that.
Oops.
And then, kind of moving forward, where are we going now? What are we hoping to do, and how do we come out on the other side? One of the things that Mr. Pipperado was charged with, that what a superintendent's charged with, as they come in, what are the backroom decisions that are made, and what are the responsibilities that you're given, was to really analyze our leadership team from a central office perspective, and who was there and what roles were they in, were they effective, were their strategies current with his vision for the school district, or was there a need to make some changes? And ultimately, I will say over the course of a year and a half, he felt the need to make some changes. And so our entire, with the exception of myself and probably 2 or 3 others, our entire central office team of administrators are new to the district. For me, having been steadfast for 33 years, I will say I've never worked with someone I didn't enjoy, never had a job I didn't like. So it didn't matter to me so much who the leadership team was because I always got along with them. But I enjoy this team a lot, and I'm in a different role. But for me, I enjoy the perspective. Having been in Easton for 33 years, that's what you know, that's what you live. My family was in education in Easton, so I grew up with that. And so to hear about education from a different perspective, just broadens your horizons and has me leading maybe in a different way that I would have thought about myself. So that has been a great thing for us, I think. And I do believe that the staff will say that it was refreshing to them to have a new perspective and look on education as well. At this point in time, and I did switch to a different slide, which doesn't matter. At this point in time, where we are is really trying to make sure that we're providing our teachers with as much professional development and support as we can, trying to give our principals some latitude and autonomy to lead. I would say for many years, good, bad, or indifferent, it was a top-down leadership model. And so what was envisioned at the top was then led down to the principal level, and they were expected to be servant leaders and kind of do what you're said and don't necessarily question that. And again, that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's not uncommon to a lot of school systems, but we're trying to make that shift because in that first model, your principals often get stuck in being managers. They get caught up in all the day-to-day operations and forget about the fact that the instruction is the important piece. And so we're trying to make that shift to give them some autonomy, refocus on the instruction for them and the teachers, and talk about what are the lessons learned from COVID. So we still use Zoom. So there are things that we can still do that were great for us, including having, now technology for every student in our school. So there are things that have come out that were positive. We're trying to capitalize on that. We're trying to expand our principals' experiences so they feel comfortable leading and making decisions on their own for their own unique buildings. And at this point, we are, focused on the whole child in terms of the social emotional well-being as well as that academic well-being. And just trying to remain focused on kids first. The other piece that came out of COVID, and we probably all know and hear it through the words of ESSER or COVID relief funds, those types of terminology. I speak about it in terms of ESSER, which is emergency relief, elementary, secondary relief fund, somewhere I messed it up, but it's a relief fund that has come from the federal government. And I will tell you that it's about 12 different grants that I had to write with some teams of people that brought in around $30 million to our district. However, it's a lot of money to give up. However, $30 million comes, it comes with a price tag. There's a lot of regulations and stipulations on how it can be used, when it can be used, how you report it. And so to believe it or not, it's a lot of money to figure out how to spend under the categories they tell you can spend it on in a short amount of time. And so we've done a pretty good job on spending some of it, but we're probably still sitting on about $16 million that by this September 30th of 2024, we have to have figured all of that out. And obviously our priority is for kids and after school programs and how can we affect change within the community. And that's a public document and will be more public facing together a PowerPoint type presentation. So that is a focus for us on how do we kind of capitalize on the community support that we have, capitalize on the financial support that we have, and re-envision what our schools can look like. And I've kind of flipped to the next page because I'm notorious for not speaking at the top same points of my slide. And so really what we're talking about now is how can we reimagine education? We have some families that have an interest in changing the time of our high school, which is 7:20 for kids, 6:50 for staff. And so if you're coming in for a parent meeting, you are sometimes asked to be there at 6:50 because that's the time that staff is available. And so that's an ungodly hour for anybody to try to think and conduct business. And so there's a group of families who think it would be best, and research shows that if you start your educational process at 8 o'clock, that's healthier for kids, particularly kids who stay up all night and sleep all day. So we are in the process of rethinking what should our high school look like? Is there a way that we can be more like a college campus where kids come and go throughout the course of the day based on the schedules they're choosing, and ebb and flow in that virtual world of education and the in-class world of education? That's probably 5 years out until we have that really planned well. The other piece that we are focusing on is equity. That has been one of our missions for probably 6 or 7 years now, and I will credit again John Weinhardt and some community members who brought that to light about 6 or 7 years ago. But in that piece of it, we did a lot of talking, a lot of discovering, and didn't move into action. Mr. Pipperado has taken that work and put it into action. And so we are starting to see some real differences for our kids in our community around equitable, equitable services, equitable relationships, thinking about things for students regardless of your race, creed, color, and making sure that every student has the same opportunity. And that's a lot of it's a lot of work that we do that is, we always tell our teachers, it's courageous to challenge somebody else's perceptions or thought processes around race and culture. And I will say our staff has done a really good job staying on board and kind of moving forward on behalf of the kids. And then the big focus really is we are rewriting all of our curriculum. At this time, our curriculum hasn't been rewritten or reimagined in probably 16 to 18 years. And so we've undertaken rewriting all of our curriculum on a scaffolded process for every content area. And all of that, my last bullet on the very last slide, I think that I have there, other than questions, is a portrait of a graduate or profile of a graduate. And so one of the things that we're going to be undertaking and have started from the back door, back scenes, is looking at what is a portrait of a graduate. What are those qualities, those characteristics that we want every graduate, regardless of your academic prowess, your cultural background, your family background, regardless of who you come through the doors, what are those skill sets we want you to leave Easton High School with so that you are a marketable, productive member of society, regardless of what your next pathway is. And so certainly we will be tapping into our community, anybody who wants to be involved with that, to share with us what are the tools that you think kids need to have as they enter the workforce. Perhaps businesses that you are involved in or were involved in, what are the skills that they need if they're going to come work at those businesses to be successful. And again, looking for our students to be involved in that. Who knows better than what they need than kids themselves, our teachers, our parents, our community, our businessmen, our politicians, to all be involved in creating this portrait of a graduate, which really then becomes the DNA and the roadmap for how we teach kids. Because from kindergarten on, it always has to be focused on what is that end game that we're looking for. And it's a compilation of skills that we want all kids to leave high school with. And I'm not talking about memorizing your states or knowing your math facts, or those are skills, and it was, kind of apropos to the piece of history that you heard, those are those skills like critical thinking, persistence, those soft skills of communication, and, how do you problem solve? So some of those types of skills, which are a little bit more global, are the types of skills we want kids to leave with and be able to apply to scenarios and situations maybe they've never seen or heard before, but they can transfer some skills into a new situation. Because the other thing that's a reality is for our kids, particularly our elementary age kids, the jobs that they'll have in 10, 12, 15 years from now are jobs that probably don't currently exist. And so our teachers are trying to teach something that they don't know is going to be out there. And what we do know we can teach are the skills that make human beings, marketable, intelligent, problem solvers, global citizens, good citizens with kind hearts. Those are the types of skills that we're looking for within our portrait of a graduate and trying to capture in the academics that we teach along the way. So, any questions or anything that I didn't hit on that maybe you wanted me to? I'm happy to try to answer them.
I have a question.
Sure.
How does the charter school compare to the in-house in the fact of doing it online? And why is there a difference?
Are you talking about the charter school, the Easton Charter School, or are you talking about the cyber school?
Cyber school.
The cyber school that you mentioned. So our cyber school, right now, I will say for kids, there are some kids in there who probably still won't land there eventually because once they feel comfortable with COVID, they'll go back to school. But for some kids, they like the cyber option because it gives them more flexibility in their day. They can learn anytime throughout the day, because really what they need to do is log in and show that they are present, take attendance. But then all of it is in a module that they can learn at 10 o'clock at night if they want to, or they can skip a day as long as they get through a week's worth of material, so they keep their pacing. They're pacing up. So some kids like the flexibility. Maybe they're involved in sports or something else that is available to them that takes them on a different schedule. Sometimes it's just their families prefer to be involved with them at home and supportive of that. I will say the work that they have on the platform is pretty rigorous. So it is compatible and comparable to the content that they get at school. It's whether or not you can connect to the delivery method. What I will also say to that is our goal for cyber is while we are currently using an online platform, our goal is to train our teachers teaching it rather than having kids connect to videos so that they still have the connection back to the traditions and the culture in the school district rather than just watching it on the video. So hopefully in 2 to 3 years, our teachers will be teaching that the kids aren't, when they log in, they'll be logging into one of our teachers, not logging into an online platform. It'll be our teachers with the videos or our teachers giving the mini lessons, where right now they're just giving the support behind the scenes for kids.
Oh, it sounds like you'll have schools.
There are lots of cyber schools out there, and we do have kids that choose other ones, but Easton Cyber is part of our school. So it's just another program kids can choose if they want to have a different learning option. So it's not a competing in terms of financially competing or tax-based competing. It is part of the program that we provide. It's called the Easton Cyber Academy, and it's entirely endorsed by Easton. But it's a competitive market in general, but it's a competitive market internally in terms of where do our teachers land their feet? Are they landing their feet in classrooms and brick and mortar, or how many of them need to cross into that cyber realm of teaching?
Cyber exists prior to the pandemic, or?
It did. We contracted through the IU20, which is an organization that has a consortium of I don't even remember how many school districts, 9 or 17, I forget which one it is, that they program through. And they hire this online platform and kind of manage that for school districts. So it existed, but pre-COVID, I would say we probably had maybe 50 kids at, 50 to 90 was typical pre-COVID. And I will tell you probably 2 at the elementary range. They were mostly high school students who had, other things on their plate that maybe they didn't want to be locked down to a 8 to 4 school day.
Are the principals responsible, or have the authority to make a decision about outside groups coming? I'm specifically looking at our service leadership programs, K-Kids and the Builders Club at the middle school. We have one operator, Mr. Ellison, Shawnee, has been having K-Kids class, and I've reached out by phone, left messages for the other schools as to whether we're going to be allowed to have a Builders Club program next school year. I'm just wondering, is it the principals that have the authority to decide that or not?
It is the principal's authority. Some of them will still feel like they need to check in and ask questions around that. But I will say we just opened that up within the last month in terms of having people come back into the building. And so some of our schools are cautiously moving into that realm, but by the fall, bearing no unforeseen circumstances that are health concerns for us, we will have our doors, opened again. We are allowing kids to go out to field trips now, which we didn't for a year and a half. So we're slowly kind of bringing things back to where we were in terms of outside organisms coming in and supporting our kids.
Following up on Walt's comment, and I'm already going to refer to before COVID, Walt's always had a problem getting any one of the schools to say, yes, we're going to do this. Whereas I'm familiar through this other states, through Kiwanis, there are other states and there's other school districts also in the state of Pennsylvania that says, no, if the administrator or the superintendent says we're going to allow clubs in, it's not up to the individual schools. If the top brass says we're going to allow this, then we're going to allow it. Whereas Easton says, well, we'll let it up each thing one. And that's always been an issue of what's the answer?
So I think one of the one of the pieces there is our top administration certainly endorses, and if there was a red flag around an organization, let's say the principals, this is an organization that can't come in for A, B, or C. And usually that's around, I don't know if there's some egregious action there, maybe some, I can't even think of a club it's happened to, but maybe there's an equity issue where we're not allowing kids of a certain race be part of a program. We wouldn't allow that. But typically, for Easton, if our top administration hasn't said this is prohibited for some reason, then we allow our principals to make those decisions based on what fits in the vision for their school. But I would certainly say if you're having a difficult time connecting or even having an audience with principals so they know what you have to offer before they say no, you can reach out to me, absolutely. And we have two directors, director of
Walt, that's for you.
you can reach out to me. And we have a director of elementary ed who replaced me, Andy Doster, and Mike Cuck, who's been a staple in Easton for quite some time. He's the director of secondary ed. And you can really do that just by calling the district line, and they'll connect you where you want to be connected. Or I can give you my business card when I'm done there. And then one of us can orchestrate a meeting with the principal. So you have an opportunity to kind of share with all the principals at one time, what does the Kiwanis have to offer and what programs might you be able to come in and support our kids with. So if that, we can certainly do that. But otherwise, in terms of authority, our principals certainly have the authority to say, yes, come in, we'd like you to come in. So if it's a matter of they didn't feel it fits their vision, and they don't know anything about you, then I would say let's organize a meeting so they all get to hear what Kiwanis is about and has to offer. If it's a matter of they don't think it fits, what they're at this minute, then I would just be persistent and start again the next year or a little bit later in the spring or whatever that may be, and say, just like to offer the service again. Cheston and Paxinosa elementary schools, who generally open with open arms, are community schools, which means we really do count on our community to partner with them to provide supports for kids. And so I would certainly hope that they reopen their doors as we get through COVID, because that's part of their mission, is making sure kids are well-rounded and have experiences, and we tap into the community to provide perspective for them.
This is Skip Fairchild here. Sorry I couldn't make the meeting, but I have two questions. As a grandfather who has had 5 grandchildren in the Easton School District, one graduated this last year and is a freshman at Penn State main campus. All of my grandkids have been involved in the sports in Easton, and Oliver obviously is a wrestler, and he's in cross country and also lacrosse. What's happening with two questions, if you don't mind? What's happening, number one, with the booster club, and number two, what was your evaluation of the kids who did remote learning compared to the kids that did in-person learning?
Great question. So one, the booster club, there's been lots of probably pressing commentary around the new policy 915, which was trying to put some guidance and I don't know what the right words are, but kind of put some framework around our booster clubs, some regulations around our booster clubs. And really that's so that we're making sure that clubs are operating in a safe manner for themselves in terms of financial responsibility, and it's coming back to our kids. And that was seen, that's one of those things that was really polarized and seen through different lenses. Certainly the administration had a lens that they looked at that through, as did the school board. And then each club had a different lens in which they looked at that policy, and it's been somewhat controversial, and it's been somewhat misunderstood in some ways. So what I'm finding, and I'm not involved in this personally in terms of the conversations, is as they're having conversations with the leadership team or the school board, our clubs are starting to gain some understanding. That doesn't mean that they are still all in support or agreement with the policy. What happened to that policy was tabled a couple meetings back, because the school board itself could not come to terms on whether they wanted to approve it or disapprove it based on public commentary from our club advisors, and making sure that we are in fact supporting our clubs and not making their jobs impossible to do. And so it was just voted on last night in a public meeting to bring that policy back to the table and ask the board to vote yes or no on the policy. My understanding is that there are no more, I don't think there are any more or any different changes within the policy than what was seen last. But I do know our superintendent met with, I see Dean Young on the screen there. He met with Dean Young and
Terry Myers.
Terry Myers, thank you. Thank you. They're right out of my head, and I've known Terry for years. Met with Terry Myers and had some good conversation and I understand came to some understanding what the policy meant in terms of what the intention of the district and the school board was versus how it was being interpreted. So I think we're closer to having our clubs feel okay about the policy, but I am sure that that varies from group to group and how you're interpreting that. At this point, it was a policy that our board had asked for. In particular, a few of our board members who have left based off of retirement of their term or other reasons. And so this current board, some people were part of that group that felt the policy was necessary, and others are new to it. So again, it's kind of I'm not sure how that will land in terms of a vote. And I do think unless they vote to table it again, which is probably unlikely, next meeting in I think the April 22nd, the second meeting in April will be a final vote. If they vote yes, then the policy will go through and we'll make the provisions we need to for clubs. And if they vote no, then it'll just be off the table until somebody decides, down the few years to bring it back up again. This was not something necessarily that this is something that many districts across the state have, but not necessarily something that our superintendent felt had to be priority one for our district. But our school board at the time asked him to, work on a policy and present that to them. So he did that with the solicitor, and now it's in the hands of the board to decide, how they want to move forward with that. And so that's where that is. And then
Just a quick follow-up before you move on.
sure.
Were there issues or problems that that made that, or is just they're trying to be,
I don't think that, I'm not aware of major issues. I think they were just trying to operate under one umbrella. And then I will say small things came up along the way in terms of, we have a couple of social clubs in the valley who have criteria that exclude women or exclude different races, but they do a lot of work for our kids and community and they advertise. And so I know that was brought up as a concern. Why are we allowing a club, for example, that has some equity concerns based on what your beliefs are, be an advertiser in pamphlets. So I think there were little things that came up that said, let's take a bigger look at this picture. And of course that, opens up a whole can of worms in terms of how people operate. What are the fundraisers that are near and dear to the heart that now does that fit in the policy, doesn't fit in the policy? There's language and legal term around gambling and whether kids can be present and what can constitutes gambling, games of chance, raffle baskets, tricky trays. And so all those things were big money makers for organizations. And so I don't think anybody's looking to do away with those pieces, but the language in its unwritten form would imply that they're in. So there may be some rethinking about how that process works in terms of are kids present, aren't kids present? Are we serving alcohol, aren't we serving alcohol? And I think it's really just trying to put a system in place for all clubs and organizations that operate under the umbrella of the Easton athletics and organizations. It's probably a policy that will never have 100% agreement or buy-in, just because every organization has things that they are near and dear to them. That's kind of where that is. And then your other question about kids who fared in person versus at home, that's a difficult question because it really, to some degree, depended on the individual learner. I would say if I had to make a generalized statement, our kids that came to school fared slightly better in terms of they had that in-person contact and they had some consolidated lessons in terms of what their teachers can impact and kind of correcting grade and support them while they were there. But we certainly had a lot of kids that learned very well online and had the support at home or didn't need support to be successful. I think one of the groups of children that were most challenged by it were our multilingual learners, our English language learners, not because of intelligence by any means, but because of the fact that they're trying to connect. There's a language difference where you can't necessarily show the pictures that might go with the vocabulary. Their parents aren't familiar with the term, technology termination. Perhaps in English, they're more familiar with it in their native language. And so trying to navigate technology, which is not a traditional teaching tool in the way we had to use it, was challenging for our kids. And then some of our kids, home lives, again, not looking through a lens of judgment, but the fact that they had lots of kids in the house, multiple kids trying to learn different grade levels, different times, and one or two family members who are also trying to do a job and teach them and keep perhaps babies, in line or whatever that was. It was just a chaotic time for some of our kids. I think our older kids fared better because they're more independent. Our little kids needed a lot more help, and that was a challenge for families, again, to do it all at one time. So I guess if I had to generalize it, was in person, but we absolutely had face and excelled in the online scenario as well. One of the benefits of the online when we were in that full mode last year was that online at least had continuity of learning. It was 5 days a week. It wasn't 2 days in, 2 days out. Because the out days they were logging into Zoom as second class, the second class citizens to the kids sitting in the classroom. And then Wednesdays everybody was on Zoom. So I will say our kids who were able to connect and function effectively online, the benefit to them was a 5-day continuity of lessons. And so there wasn't that choppiness of how they were experiencing school.
How many students are in
Easton School, the question was how many students? There are around 8,700, so just under 9,000.
In recent days, there's been articles that I've seen in the Morning Call about a critical teacher shortage in the Bethlehem School District. Is the Easton School District suffering the same?
We are. That is certainly, I don't know if it's a fallout of COVID or if it was a trend before that. Some things will indicate that it was a trend before. We have a dramatic decline in bus drivers, for one. We have been operating at about a 16 driver shortage all year long. And then substitutes and teachers have been at a premium as well. And I forget the statistic off the top of my head, but there is, I'm going to say 60. I don't know that that's the right number, but it's a dramatic number less students in our preparatory classes going to college to be teachers. So there are a lot less students coming out as certified teachers who are looking for jobs, where normally if we would post, particularly an elementary job, we might have 200 resumes for 2 jobs or 1 job, and the applicants were plentiful. And now we are posting positions 2 and 3 times to even get an applicant or a qualified applicant. Part of that ESSER money that I talked about, that, multi-millions of dollars, part of what we can spend that on is additional teachers to close that learning gap. So maybe we want teachers to come in and work with small groups of kids or do a concentrated skill with kids. And that was fully our intention, to hire some temporary staff who pay through COVID. And when that goes away, we wouldn't necessarily be able to sustain it. So they were temporary staff that would be there on an annual basis to support kids in that manner. And what we found is, to this day, we have not fully staffed our schools in terms of people leaving for moving or leaving for a different career, or just deciding this wasn't where they wanted to be, or pregnancy, all those pieces of leaves, people leaving. All the folks that we brought in to close the gap get sucked into a classroom because we don't have a teacher teach the group of kids sitting in the classroom. And so it is a real challenge, and it's not an Easton or a Bethlehem challenge. That is a nationwide challenge.
Is there any Are you seeing any signs of pressure to increase teacher salaries that draw in any people?
So that's an interesting question too, because we were in the midst of negotiating our teacher contract. I will tell you, they have been very fair and respectful in what they are asking for. Right now, one of the things that we are playing back and forth on are actually professional development days. How much time do they spend outside of their actual teaching and come to work and have professional development? That's been a play back and forth right now, because it impacts the number of days they teach, which of course impacts their daily rate. But they have been extremely respectful and not egregious in asking for salaries that are unreasonable. But I will tell you that as a teacher organization, NEA, PSEA, they are encouraging our teachers to campaign for themselves and ask for salary increases that are commensurate with some of the other salaries that are being had because of shortages in other entities. One of the things, regardless of where our contract falls out, we have talked about how can we provide, I don't want to say a bonus structure, but for one of the things we have lots of money for is for teachers to teach after school or summer, but they're exhausted and don't necessarily want to commit to a full summer after they've taught, a full year in this challenging manner. And so we are talking about how can we pay them what we've always paid, which is a really fair wage, but then give them bonus salary on top of that per week that they serve over the summer. So trying to find ways that don't affect their union contract, but that we can still support them financially and or emotionally, whatever that may be. So
Is there this might be out of left field question. In fact, it's probably beyond the ballpark. Is there any discussion about year-round school rather than having a summer off?
not currently at the district level in a serious manner, in a intentional manner, I would say. It is a conversation that comes up sometimes from the community, and it does come up internally because those teachers who do teach summer school, we do have kids who are in school almost year round because we take about a week to 2 weeks break, and then we start summer school, which is anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks, and then they have 2 weeks at the end of the summer. And so for some kids, there is almost a year-round experience, but for our teachers, it's a choice to be involved in that. And so we haven't gotten there yet.
I was wondering because it's clear that students have not progressed as far as they would have absent.
Sure.
And it seems like moving to this might be a good way
To move forward.
To allow them to catch up.
Yes. I will tell you, my sister since left education, but works in Massachusetts, and where she was a superintendent of school system. It was a charter public, but they were year round. And what that looked like is they might have had a 2 week, fall break, a 2 week spring break, a longer Christmas break. I think they still had 4 to 6 weeks in the summer, but in general, they were there throughout the year. It is certainly a system that I'm in favor of, but we have not intentionally talked about that as a system yet. Recently, anyway.
Have they, has Pennsylvania ever, in terms of that as a topic, we're still talking about whether or not they're going to make kindergarten mandatory.
Right.
I can't imagine if we can't figure that out, that we can figure out that year round is.
Again, it may be topics at a political
down
level,
to
but
the-
it hasn't filtered down to.
the.
Two things that have filtered down is, universal kindergarten, if we're not 100% there as a state. And universal pre-K is part of a conversation now as well. And I think that I think that would be a great thing for kids. It would be a hardship for early childhood providers unless we can absorb them into our school systems.
Well, there's gonna have to be some discussion
Right.
between the private providers and how that affects them
Right.
and the school districts can.
It's a big impact, infrastructure, knowledge base on early child. There's a whole lot that comes with that. And seeing that the kindergarten thing has been a discussion for probably at least 10 to 15 years. I don't know that we'll jump into early childhood too soon, but you never know in the state what will come.
Well, it's interesting because they're talking about universal pre-Ks, but we have no mandatory kindergarten. So here you have a program over here
Right.
that would feed into a
Right.
kindergarten program.
Yeah.
And there is no mandate for that in this.
Sometimes
state,
with the
so.
state, structures don't always make sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Tracy, do you consider using aides to supplement and help the teachers when they're doing all of that?
we
So
do.
they're not so exhausted.
We do, in fact, in our district, we call them paraprofessionals. And believe it or not, they are very hard to come by as well. So we, when I talk about staffing and we set aside money, we set aside a lot of money to bring on staff. We're happy to bring them on. We cannot find them to come on. At this point, we are talking about using ESSER dollars to hire staff. And hope that through attrition and budgetary planning, we can sustain them. The danger of bringing people on in a full-time contracted position with federal dollars is, can you sustain it when those dollars go away?
Yes.
And so we're considering the play, now let's just bring them on and give them a contract, because maybe that will entice people to come. But we have to hope all of our stars align in 2 years when our budget, our district budget has to sustain it.
I have a quick
That'd
question.
be a challenge.
You mentioned you were one of the few survivors when the staff changed. How many people have that involved, that left or whatever, or changed?
Yeah,
You have any?
basically our building principals stay the same. So it was really the top echelons, new assistant superintendent, not myself. They added, so we only had one assistant superintendent and they added a second position and split that from a assistant superintendent of everything to an assistant superintendent of curriculum and one of operations. So the one superintendent that was there is no longer, our business manager is no longer,
Right.
our HR person is no longer.
So maybe 10 people at the max? or-
Yeah, five to
So they
8
just
in there.
found another job to retire and that's it, they replaced.
A combination. Some saw the writing on the wall and saw other
Right. They
employment.
weren't teachers though, they were staff.
Not teachers. When I say that, I'm strictly talking about that upper administration.
So they had no tenure or anything like that?
Upper administration, when I talk about that, your superintendent, your assistant
Right.
superintendent, your business
Right,
manager,
they're all hired.
your HR, some of those are commission positions, which means you get a contract, you're sworn in by
Right, okay.
a judge, and when your contract is over, if the board chooses not to renew you, you're just not
Thank you,
renewed.
thank you.
And so that's really how the folks ended up leaving. And some kind of saw the writing on the wall and
Yeah.
positioned themselves to leave ahead of time.
So you think they're in better shape now than they were?
I like the direction that we're moving. I think we're moving as a team and a unit a little bit better than we were. But again, I will say, in my experience, that I have not come across a person that I didn't like or couldn't work with.
I think we should give our speaker.
Yeah.
a little bit of
Mr. Garvin.
later, but I mean, the information you provided was obviously good. Everybody here was interested in it, and we needed to know it. Questions from online, you can see all the questions you got here today, so.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, I'm happy
We
anytime,
appreciate it.
you can reach out to me. I will certainly leave some business cards and.
I think the entire focus of the chaos of COVID was zeroed in right at the schools.
Yeah.
And the fact that you guys have had to work your way with all the political input and
You're either a hero or a cad, right? But at the end of it, you have to stay focused on kids and do the best you can do,
that's right.
and that's why we're here.
Neil,
Great job, great job.
Could you ask one more question? Okay, one more question.
When the Palmer Elementary Taj Mahal is done,
Yes.
which is right near me, and I see it all the time. Is the space capacity at the Shawnee area, is that going to be used, is that needed and going to be used for, what will that be used for?
So currently Palmer Elementary School is in our middle school campus, which we have used as a revolving door for every school that was renovated over the last 4 or 5 years. Palmer School, the new school out in Palmer, I forget the name of that road now.
Green Pond Road.
That school will have a capacity of about 750 students. And right now, current Palmer School is around 600. So there is room to grow in there. And then the facility that is there, the original middle school, or the built on middle school, did serve in its original state 6 through 9, excuse me. And so currently that is 6 through 8. So there was a little bit of room for us to do that by smushing kids, into half of a building. At this point, the plan is to really pull 6th grade back over to the side that Palmer is using and letting them kind of spread their wings a little bit and be a cohesive unit. And then, again, give the space in the middle school room to kind of operate a little bit more seamlessly. One of the things that we did is try to separate 6th grade a little bit and give that principal some autonomy to create a transition program so that it's a little bit different from what they saw in K to 5, but not quite the expectation of that secondary level when you hit 7th grade. I will say Charlene Simia is a dynamic, wonderful woman. But she's still trying to come up with that vision of what that might look like. So I would say I don't see tremendous change right this minute, other than they're teaming and they kind of work as a 6th grade unit. But if you had kids in 6th grade a few years ago and kids in 6th grade now, would you say, oh my gosh, that was so much different? I don't think so. I think the big difference is really the teaming that she has with the elementary principals now that are trying to have collective conversation on how do we support kids. But I think there's lots of room for imagination there for her, and she's just figuring out what that might be. So at this point, the expectation is giving everybody a little bit of elbow room to have space and breathe.
I get lost in that.
Depending on the capacity, there might be a new vision based on all the building that's happening in our neighborhoods. So
That's a big school. I get lost in there.
it is a very big school.
2 quick, by the way, you can take your lunch with you if you choose to. Joe would be proud.
Thank you.
Good job. Thank you.
A bunch of items today, but I'm not going to cover them all. And I think I mentioned last week that our speakers have been so interesting and so informative, and all the questions we get, it's really difficult to do business at these meetings because it's 1:10 already, okay? We have one important item to mention, and I don't know if you probably don't want to go through details today, do you, Joanne? But Bill has printed the tickets.
Yep, we have the tickets here.
You can pass out those papers that I printed, and the details are all there.
If anybody wants to see me after, Terry, I will go over everything because, this will be the first time that you're, if you want to spend a few minutes with me.
Sure.
I'll go over the detail, but I'm not going to open the tickets. I'll have them next week at the dinner. We'll leave some time at the end of the dinner that if you want to see me, what you want to do is, if you want certain numbers, let me know, because I'll take those tickets, take them out and save them for you. Because we have people that do like certain numbers.
I'll put my request in, Joanne. I want the one that wins.
Okay. But Bill did one heck of a job. We sat down over the weekend. Yeah, it was Sunday. Sunday afternoon, and everything is here today. That's how fast he works. Okay.
He does.
So, like I said, you'll see me afterwards. We'll spend a couple minutes together, and I'll go over all this to the newies to make it easy, so you know exactly what's entailed. Okay?
BBS 39 is happening this weekend. Those of us that Janice coordinated that, and we have our instructions on what to do. So that's happening. Those on Facebook would have seen the pictures that Janet put on from the readings that they did last week. That was a good activity for us. Charlie's dinner, the last head count is today. Right now we're at 25. If anybody wants to join us, please let Jerry know, and that we have that. SLPs, well, I don't think we've got anything new other than we're waiting to
We
hear.
hear from principals from a couple of schools.
All right, James and I talked, and a couple other of us have talked about this. We want to have a strategic planning meeting with the board. We'll do that sometime toward the end of April to map out where we want to go the rest of the year and into James's year next year. That will allow us to do a budget. Chris has been so kind as to put together some books of history of the last 5 years, where our money has gone to the different organizations by year and by organization, which I think will give us a good basis to be able to do that budget. I know he has a couple extra here for us today, and he's had those printed at Staples. What else? Well, the police officer of the year award, that's pretty well on the way. There's no board meeting this month. There's a couple of things that opportunities. Phillips, I'll send it around. Phillips is going to have their birthday meeting in April. They meet on the second Tuesday of the month. I'll send that out. And they meet at on South Main Street. Soma or whatever it is. It's like $10 and they have their meeting there plus drinks. Okay. So I'll put that out. Bill received something in the mail for Pedals for Progress, which might be something we work with P-Berg for. They collect old bikes and other things to send. I think that's enough. On April the 6th, I believe Nancy will be here. We're going to present the check to communities and schools for Easton, Pennsylvania on the 6th. So I believe she and Janine will be here. Other than that, anybody else have anything?
I did get 4 applicants for scholarships for the Key Club.
Okay.
So we usually do 2 scholarships, but $2,000 scholarships, that's a lot.
Okay. I don't know that we can do that this year, but we can talk about it.
Yeah.
I believe you have $1,000 there already that we could do at least
That's right.
do
That's
one.
right. Yeah. Then what I probably will do is, I think the Key Club sets aside during the year some scholarship money, and then I'll just match it for the second one. So that works.
Okay, or however we do it. Okay, or we can talk to the foundation. Okay. Anything else? Good meeting. It's good to see everybody. It's good to see everybody on online. Hey, Skip, one more thing. How many volunteers have you gotten for our open positions for the board?
Well, it's interesting. I think you and I tied for the number of volunteers. 0. The word still goes out. We are looking for anybody interested in serving as the president-elect, or any member that is interested on serving on our board can let Neil or I know.
And serving on the board is a good way to learn more about the ins and outs of the club, and we're certainly open to adding more people to the board besides the existing board. That's all I have.
Yeah, because without a president-elect, it looks like James is going to have to be president for life.
Just like Russia.
We might be holding some hybrid meetings.
And there's a 4-term limit, so I'm out too. Okay, I thank you everybody for coming. If there isn't anything else, good seeing everybody on Zoom, and we'll see some of you at Charlie's dinner next week. If not, we'll see you back here on the 6th.